Professor Rex Ahdar from New Zealand, University of Otago, and he has a long CV that you can see here. Very respectful. Okay, anyway, Professor Ahdar published several books on law and religion.
Thanks very much.
And published many articles in prestigious venues, and we'll really want to hear his presentation on the empty idea of equality.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, sounds loud. Shalom and tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which is a traditional Maori greeting back in my country. Is it 30 minutes? Oh, you haven't told me. How long do we speak for, Professor Shapiro? How long is my segment?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Oh, right, okay. Well, I got the idea of this from rereading an article I read quite a few years ago by Peter Weston, which some of you may have read. It's quite a well-known article. So I'm really just taking some of his ideas and developing it from there. So rather quickly, I'll just go over Weston's empty idea of equality, which is from his 1982 Harvard Law Review article. And to take one, he starts off with one passage from his article. Equality is entirely circular. It tells us to treat people alike, but when we ask who are like people, or who like people are rather, we are told they are people who should be treated alike. So equality is an empty vessel, said Professor Weston, with no substantive moral content of its own. Without moral standards or some anterior criteria or rule or standard, equality remains meaningless, a formula that can have nothing to say about how we should act. With such standards, equality becomes superfluous, a formula that can add nothing but repeat what we already know. It's essentially a conclusion expressing what we already know. And put rather more simply by Greenawald, he says, I grant Weston's point that one could not typically tell which people and what treatment are equal without substantive standards. That's pretty more simple. So he goes through in his famous article to make a number of claims, and I'll summarise them, that equality is empty, tautological, derivative, conclusory and superfluous. But I think his greatest charge, and leads into today's topic, is its propensity to mislead and camouflage the actual moral basis of the claim. Now, I don't really have time to go through his critique of how it is tautological and conclusory, but hopefully you've got a bit of the gist of it, that before you can't tell whether A and B are equal or worthy of similar treatment until you have some rule, standard, criteria to identify in which respects they are equal and hence deserving of similar treatment. Because as he makes the point in his article, in some respects everyone is equal and in some respects everyone is different. So we have to decide on which respects are the ones that count. And I'm not doing his wonderful article justice, but that's trying to capture the pith of it. Of course, once you've identified the anterior or the prior standard or rule, which determines whether A and B are similar or equal, then really that's really the gist of it. You should really apply that rule or standard, and to state that A and B are equal is just a natural, logical conclusion from applying that rule, really. Now, that wouldn't be so bad, but he goes on to make the point that if you put arguments about substantive rights and claims in terms of equality to begin with, then those who oppose this new or novel or advanced claim or right can be cast as opponents of equality. they're put on the defensive on the back foot. And so that's one of his objections and to couching these debates in terms of equality. And I give an example in my paper of same-sex marriage. It's a topical of how it's often put in terms of, you know, we're arguing for marriage equality all the time. Okay, well, you know, that's a very strong rhetorical and strategic advantage if you can couch it that way, because all those who oppose that are, as I've said, are put on defensive and somehow seem aiming against equality, motherhood and apple pie and other such worthy things. So no one likes to be put. Really the question is, you know, what it really is a complex question as to what are the key, I don't know, elements or aspects that constitute a marriage. And that's another large topic that's beyond the scope here. Is it procreation? Is it a loving commitment? Is it this? Is it that? We could go to, but those individual criteria or standards tend not to be debated because it's presented in the form of equality. This group is being, so it is said, treated unequally. What can you do to justify this apparent unequal treatment? Okay, well, Weston's critique has received, as you'd expect, a lot of criticism and attacks thereafter, which I go through in my paper. Some of them, the best ones, are by people like Greenawalt. It says it's still important, for example, that granted it has a certain empty quality, but a presumption or a starting point of equality is still very important. We heard that earlier today in the opening hour about, you know, there's this commitment or instinct towards equality is a very important thing, and it's quite recent in the history of mankind, and I don't disagree with that. Of course, it just presupposes, of course, that equal treatment is somehow presumptively or a priori better than unequal treatment, and you know, where do you get that rule from? You're back to searching for the source of it again. Why are legal and moral arguments in terms of equality so prevalent? Well, I think I've already said that, because if you can present your claim in an equality fashion, you know, it has tremendous force. And some would say, well, that's good, the end should justify the means perhaps, and if it's a worthy thing that's being advanced, so much better if you couch it in the form of equality. Weston addresses that point in his article, and he thinks that's not a good idea, and in fact neither do I. And this is the fact that Weston actually, as he says in his article, was in favour of a lot of the claims and rights being presented. You know, he agreed with the merits of them, but he just didn't like the strategy. Now there's this thesis that equality is an empty vessel. It really presupposes something prior to it. Turn to religion. Well, I called it a bit, perhaps colourfully, you know, the unbearable fullness of religion. I think compared to equality, you know, religion is so much richer. Here's a corny line from my thing. Religion is inherently rich or full concept, unlike equality. One may as well put a Stravinsky symphony alongside a Beach Boys song. I mean, they're just, you know, they're just... Now, you could say religion is empty itself, of course, and there is merit in saying, well, you know, you can't talk about religion in the round as a general thing. It's always a specific or particular religion, and that's true too. You know, it's to talk about religion as a broad concept. So we're really always talking about a particular religion, and I grant that point. Okay, that's fine. Now, one of the reasons for the presumption of equality was that we lack a certain amount of certainty in our moral judgments. We cannot, on the grounds of epistemology or metaphysics, really know whether these two matters, things, categories are similar or equal. So the default position is to treat them equally. Now, that might in a secular, perhaps scientific sense be okay. But when we turn to religion, or many religions, or let's say some religions, or the religions of the book, I'll talk more about Christianity, or conservative Christianity, or evangelical Christianity, like the quote goes, to be more specific. So some of these people, think that there is some certainty to many of these questions. In fact, that not all values and rights or interests are equal. In fact, they're quite prepared to say there is a hierarchy. Now, in other settings and worldviews, we wouldn't be prepared to say that. So I think religion does have a hierarchy of rights. That the courts, I give quotes in the paper, disavow saying there is a hierarchy between these rights, but I don't think religion has to be so modest. And my assertion in the paper is that the primary right, I think, out of this modern category is religious freedom. It's probably for that right the Americans refer to it as the first freedom. Now, I think there really is something in that, and I think that is the primary one. So, and I discuss it at a point in the paper about how, under many conceptions of religious freedom, it's not so much a right, or if it is a right, it's a duty right. You're given this liberty or freedom to discharge a duty you have before God. So that's a Madisonian, and others have put that point of view. It's repeated, for example, in the Vatican's Dignitatis Humanae Declaration of Religious Freedom. Now, what about on conflicts between equality and religion? Well, these things do clash, as we know. Of course they do, say some people, and that's not something that perhaps those that were sold bills of rights in the modern era, ours was introduced in 1990 in New Zealand. The proponents or advocates of bills of rights stayed strategically rather quiet about these inevitable conflicts of rights that were coming up. And one can understand why. So they not only kept quiet about the conflicts that were coming, they also kept rather quiet about the fact that there was no hierarchy or a priori ranking of them as well. So lawyers and law professors and the like knew about these things. They also knew in New Zealand, for example, that in Canada, which had its Charter of Rights and Freedoms not long before, that it was already becoming apparent that conservative Christian groups were starting to come second there to various equality rights. And so it's proved, the experience has proved, in New Zealand, in Australia, in United Kingdom. I give, you can turn to the Daily Telegraph or any of these newspapers and find headlines now every week about some conservative Christian person or group who's come a cropper, come second in some resolution, whether it's the Ashes Bakery so-called gay cake, about this case in Northern Ireland. These sorts of things happen all the time. These are really not surprising. The question is how one resolves them. Well, perhaps I'll just leave that a little bit later, but the thing is they must be resolved in a human rights framework, and that much is a given. And as Evans says, Malcolm Evans, in one sense, the human rights paradigm has become judge and jury in its own cause, because already, if you like, religion has been shrunk or diluted to just another right alongside all these other rights. So, that's, to many religious people would find that offensive, or at least rather curious. Especially, no offence to you, but to Johnny-come-lately rights like the right not to be discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation, which was added in New Zealand in 1993, for example. Okay, still going to talk to me later.
I appreciate it.
Okay, that's good. So, and I think this conflict of rights is of unusual ferocity, the conflict of rights between equality and human rights generally and religion, because in a sense, this can be exaggerated, but human rights codes, of which equality looms large, have really vaunted themselves in many ways as a new secular morality. So we have really almost like, put it crudely, a turf war between religion and religious codes, and these secular moralities encapsulated in human rights codes. So that's why I think the battle between these two particular rights is particularly fierce and particularly difficult to resolve, really. So back to balancing, what do we do? Well, yeah, I like the orchestration metaphor, but you may get as much Schoenberg as Stravinsky in this. It may be quite discordant, or one, and it takes a pretty good orchestrator or conductor to get it right too. But let's leave these corny lines aside for a second. One way, and I think it's been mentioned, is to perhaps and I'd say it here, the legislature should perhaps in advance carve out some more particular exceptions for the sort of standardised situations where these equality and religious things are going to advance, and instead of passing the buck, so to speak, to tribunals to do it, that might be one answer. I'm not sure how I'm going for time, I've lost the track of it, but I give an illustration in the case, which I won't go through at length, about a recent Canadian case where there was a clash between religious freedom and equality. And this involved the Nova Scotia Barristers Society that sought to refuse to recognise a law degree granted by a new law school in Canada, the Trinity Western University, an evangelical Christian university. And that law school's policy prohibited sexual intimacy for students outside of traditionally defined marriage. And basically the Nova Scotia Law Society didn't want to admit law graduates from this university that seemed to have such a discriminatory policy. And so this all ended up in court. Now, to stop here, I don't know if you've read my paper or no, but did they have authority to do this, and how should we resolve this matter? The Nova Scotia Law Society saw the issue, quote, as a matter of equality and the vindication of the rights of the LGBT students studying at Trinity Western, whereas the Trinity Western University viewed it as an incursion upon its religious freedom. If I was to go around and ask my students to do, let's just, they never come along to class having read the case, of course, so I just got to say to them, okay, you guys, so which way do you think the judge ought to have ruled here? And I could probably have a show of hands here, but I won't. But on this occasion, they ruled in favour of Trinity Western, in favour of religious freedom and against equality. And they saw it, I'm not, this is my paraphrase, not his, as really an example of a certain amount of bullying by an institution like the Law Society to really force this private educational institution to change its policies to reflect its view of the good. Now, this is my own words, not the court's view. And I think he was pretty right, the judge. Here's a little quote. Here's one. He thought a lot of this was really about public perception. What will people think, he puts. And here's a nice quote from the case. He said this is the judge. If the test becomes, what does it say about equality if such and such should happen? Then a hierarchy of rights has been established with religious liberty relegated to a vastly diminished status. And that's how he saw it. If the primary question is going to be, what will people say about this in terms of equality? So I'll wrap it up by saying, going to my conclusion, and so much I think of contemporary political and moral debate is couched in terms of equality and equal treatment, and that's not surprising because supporters of a particular moral and legal claim, I think, have a rhetorical advantage in casting their argument in the language of equality. And those who oppose the new entitlement are in a defensive position as constituted a rather benighted cadre who would oppose equal rights for others. And when we turn to equality versus religious rights conflicts, we see that, and this is empirically so, religious claimants are often disadvantaged in terms of sort of the win-loss ratio. It's decidedly in favour of equality over religion. If religion was managed by a manager like a football coach, the coach would be sacked by now. So, and I think religion is just understood as tends to be understood as just another autonomy or identity right. it has or ought not to have no special status. There is, after all, we're told, no hierarchy of rights. So thus what for a devout person is a preeminent duty is for tribunal and courts who interpret and operate the rights machinery, just another right or freedom alongside the many others. Now, while there's no de jure hierarchy of rights, I think there's mounting evidence that there's a de facto one. Well, if substantive rights are strategically couched in the form of appeals to equality or equal treatment, and if they're being upheld for fear that any other holding will expose the institution to criticism for being against equality, then I think we're in a conceptual and legal morass. If the litmus test is how will our decision on X be seen in terms of advancing or impeding the march to a more equal society, then equality has indeed become the uppermost right. One is tempted to say that equality has become the first among equals. In this analytical, legal and moral quagmire, religious individuals and communities that cling to understandings of social, sexual, familial and other relations that depart from the mainstream will continue to face an uphill task. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking paper. And let's open up discussion.
I went first last time, so if someone else wants to go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, mine is directed to Rex because I just formulated it, but it actually overlaps. There have been several references to identity, which is part of my larger project, and I'm trying to fit my equality paper into an identity framework. Rex asked whether religion is just another identity right. Mark was concerned about the identity of decision makers, and I think there was reference to identities of various groups. I guess I'm wondering if there's some relationship between equality and identity that's important to develop here, or is identity not as significant as equality?
Well, I could give the formalist answer. There's no right to identity, so it's not even mentioned in the law and the human rights instruments and that. So it's I don't know. It's more
Not
of a
yet.
well, there are new rights being added by the day, but well, I mean, is there a relationship? Yes, but what it is, there's an overlap between them, but they're not coterminous. I couldn't give you a better answer off the cuff than that one. Perhaps Mark.
Is it the ability to live one's life? I think that was the phrase Mark used. Is that
Self-determination.
self-determination?
I think we could talk more about it, but I don't want to take away from your... I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah.
Let me ask you, please, about the emptiness of equality, whether it's really empty, as Weston suggested. I think let's start with distinction between legal equality and moral equality. So it seems that when we talk about moral equality, we mean something about the value of every and each human being. There is a normative, maybe even metaphysic assumption about the value of every and each human being, which is maybe a new notion, a modern notion, but there is maybe old. I think you can find it already in the Bible. So the idea that human beings were created in the image of God, there is kind of a notion, a metaphysic notion of the value of every and each human being, which embedded the idea of equality in this sense. The same thing with the idea of dignity, which in a way replace or stand the same, has the same weight of as a marker to something which is normative or metaphysic with regard to the moral value of every and each human being, which is, here you have equality, which I believe is not empty. I mean, as it's not built on any other rule. There is an assumption. You can ask where it comes from, but it seems that we share this assumption at this moment. So now, when you go to question of legal equality, when you ask something more specific and more operative, so then it comes the question, of course, in what respect they are equal, in what respect they are different. But if the assumption, the moral assumption, is that there is something which is equal morally, then the burden, why to treat them differently, would be on the one that want to treat them differently.
Well, you really, can I respond, or you're the chair? Yeah, you've sort of restated Weston's point about the presumption of equality, that we live in an age where equality is the default position, and those who would oppose equal treatment must somehow justify it. But you know, you don't escape from the emptiness of it, because I've just got to say to you, like Arthur Leaf said in his famous article, the Says Who article. Well, who says they're equal? And in what respect are they equal? And who says it's better to treat people who are undeserving or unequal equally? Who says that's a priori better than treating people equally?
I read Weston's article many years ago, so I guess I would, the notion of equality, has of human beings of the sort that Chaim was describing, has grounding in the Enlightenment project of last several hundred years. I think it's true that in order to understand its application, you have to answer the kinds of questions that Weston points to and that you as well point to. But the sort of the presupposition that human beings, by virtue of their being human, ought to have equal dignity, which is not something that always was the assumption, but has been strongly for the last couple of hundred years. It's work that has some, it has some grounding, and I don't know. I mean, it's somebody like Weston and you, to the extent that you're defending Weston, it seems to me you have a lot of work to do to explain how this commitment to equality, which is so widespread, how it's how so many people are just so wrong. I mean, either Weston is wrong, or like everybody else is. They've just like swallowed, the Kool-Aid. Whatever that expression
is. To be facetious and
say, they're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Let God be true and every man a liar. But I mean, that's a facetious answer. But no, I don't see that at all. That we have. I mean, it's. The point of view of pure logic, okay, dignity and self-determination, autonomy are not, by their nature, relational terms, all right, in the sense that you can talk about one person's dignity. So. But, equality by its very nature is a comparative thing. Two things must be compared. It's nonsensical to talk about equal unless you are comparing two separate things. Now, as soon as you're into that aspect, okay, it's philosophically, logically a different way of thinking about it. And you must necessarily have some outside measure or standard to decide whether these two things are equal. Otherwise, it's a contradiction in terms. Therefore, we ask, what is this rule, standard, criteria? It says these two things, people, dogs, cats, vegetables, are equal. What is the scale? We're measuring it in, if you want to do that, whatever. What is that thing?
I feel like I'm struggling. Let me try and phrase it this way. So Amartya Sen famously says that the question isn't, with equality in the very same ways. Equality of what? every time you ask the equality question, you have to, in the same line as Rex is kind of talking about here, you have to pick the thing that you're identifying. So Mark, when you said before, kind of pushing back on Rex, the equality of humans, like you've added the of humans, meaning of humans is doing the work. Equality again is the relational point. And I guess what I'm struggling with in both papers, maybe less so with Rex on a certain level, hitting religion against equality seems like maybe the wrong way to go about it. I mean, even when we talk about a freedom of religion, there's an equality built in there that we're going to treat the concept of religion equally across the board, and that's what gives us a freedom of religion. Or, to use Sen's point, every liberty claim can be phrased in terms of equality, and every equality claim can be phrased in terms of liberty. It just depends kind of how you want to go about it. And I guess what I'm wondering at this point is, and maybe this is a question for Mark, and maybe I feel like Rex is taking some fire here, so I'll jump in on this.
From New Zealand.
What work is equality doing in the end, or do you disagree with that, Mark? Maybe we shouldn't be talking about religion versus equality, but equality of religion versus equality of something else. What do you make of all that?
Well, I mean, the truth is, and we join points on this, I agree that just equality full stop doesn't really answer all that much. And so in my paper, the provisional position I've taken is that the best way of actually characterizing the gay couple's position is equality of citizenship. That's what I add. What is entailed by being a citizen of a given polity? Now I actually think that there is something there that we can talk about. In religious florists, does that mean that a gay couple, by virtue of the fact that they're American citizens when they're in America, can go into any establishment or not? That's the way that I phrase it. I mean, are you suggesting that when we better understand things, there will not be conflicts between religion and equality?
I think that's right. I think equality kind of hovers above, like if I were looking at number one over there, so like if it were in a three-dimensional space, I feel like with my jet lag I'm going to hurt myself right now, but in a three-dimensional space, equality kind of is a descriptor for each of your circles. So that when we talk about, there's equality of religion, there's equality of citizenship. They both have an equality structure to them, and really the values kind of at stake are religion and citizenship, or something along those lines. Equality is doing, I guess, structurally or philosophically similar work for each circle. And so maybe we're kind of missing the point. If we kind of disguise it with equality, we're not talking about the substantive, the pluralistic and substantive values. I'm with you on the conflict piece, but equality is disguising what the real conflict is. It's going to make us think that we're almost going to be talking about conflicts of things that are working on two different planes.
Okay, equality of citizenship. I actually think that that's a pretty good way of describing.
Why did you say equality of religion?
I'm sorry, what? Why wouldn't I? In what way is...
We're going to treat everyone has a right to citizenship, everyone has a right to religion, or something along those lines. It strikes me as, for some reason, the word equality is emphasized more when we talk about the citizenship piece and less about religion, but it's not, maybe I'm wrong about this, it's not clear to me that there's any good reason for that. They're both equality of some things.
Well, I don't know. So think about things from the vantage point of the religious florist. Do you think the best way of describing the nature of, her claim is an equality of religion claim?
I think so. I think the florist would say all religious people should be treated in the same way. For this thing called religion, we all have an equal right to it for whatever reasons we can give an argument about. In the same way that the consumer of the flowers has an equal claim to citizenship like all other people do. But they're both, again, to use kind of sense framework, I'm not reinventing the wheel here, it's always an equality of what question. And so the what in one case is citizenship. Surely the florist doesn't think they should have a right to religion as opposed to others. There's embedded in there some sort of equality claim. Otherwise it would just be, I don't want to do this, and that's the end of it.
I don't know. Two things. First of all, Sen says it doesn't convince me. And I actually, to me, the redescribing the florist's claim as an equality of religion claim is a shoehorning. It distorts what I really think is, in fact, your average religious florist, who's at your Thanksgiving table. They think their liberty to exercise their religion is being interfered with. If my Uncle Joe were a Catholic florist, and he described the pain he felt, I don't think he'd describe it as equality. I don't know. We could describe it that way. I just don't see it doing any work.
I'm going to push back on it. Just
Yeah.
because your Uncle Joe says it doesn't mean it's true either.
Absolutely right.
And just in all fairness, I want it to be equal in terms of the criticism.
No.
But I guess surely, and I guess this is what Sen means when he says that liberty can be rephrased in terms of equality. Even liberty claims are equal claims. Otherwise, just might is right. I want this, and the end. Clearly, when I claim liberty or I claim religion, I do it in some sort of sophisticated way that I'm not just kind of saying what I want. I'm saying that it is, for all cases of X, there should be an outcome based on some sort of argument of Y. Like, it's built into every equality claim, and I really do think that's what everybody means. And for some reason, it's emphasized when you say the word citizenship, and not when you say the word religion. Those seem to be what you're really fighting about. Equality just sits in the background. It's really like a claim for equal citizenship, a claim for equal treatment of religion. And those are the two things that are fighting. And equality is like a bystander. It's you're not going to buy this, so I'm done.
No.
We've reached our impasse, I think.
I think, there's a sense in which equality and religion are so different. And I think philosophers use the term a category error. You're actually also trying to compare or trade off two completely dissimilar sorts of things. It's so difficult to a hippopotamus and a tractor or something. I don't know. They're just so different. They're just.
I think the food is getting cold.
Oh, that's
And we
real.
have equal right for dinner.
Yeah.
So we'll stop here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.